In every great story, the hero is only as memorable as the villain they face. And when it comes to Final Fantasy, the series has given us some of the most iconic, twisted, and unforgettable antagonists in gaming history. From power-hungry warlords to gods of destruction, from tragic figures to pure embodiments of chaos, these villains have left their mark not just on their worlds, but on ours as players. And in this video, we'll be counting down the most legendary villains in Final Fantasy. Those who defined their games, tested our heroes, and shaped the very essence of what makes this franchise so powerful. Let's dive into the dark side of Final Fantasy. I'm your host Rayman from Respawn Games, and let's get to it. When we think of Final Fantasy, our minds often go to the breathtaking worlds, the unforgettable heroes, and the emotional stories. But what truly makes these adventures stick with us are the villains, the forces of chaos, tragedy, and ambition that drive the narrative forward. Without them, the heroes would have no struggle, no reason to grow, and no world to save. And in this video, guys, we are diving deep into the most iconic villains in Final Fantasy. We'll explore what makes them so unforgettable. What are their motivations? What are their connections to the heroes? And the sort of impact they have on the story. And the way they change and challenge not just the characters, but as players. Some villains stand out because of their sheer presence and power. Others because their backstories are layered with tragedy. And some because they represent timeless themes like despair, ambition, or the destructive nature of humanity itself. So guys, these aren't just enemies. They're the heartbeat of the stories. They're the ones who make every victory meaningful, every sacrifice heartbreaking, and every ending unforgettable. So join me as we step into the darker side of Final Fantasy and count down the villains who defined a franchise and secured their place in gaming history. We're firstly going to start off with a couple of honourable mentions, guys, because I can't do a top 10 list of my favourite villains without a couple of honourable mentions, because there are so many iconic villains. At the heart of Final Fantasy XVI lies a figure older than kingdoms, older than the very history of Valisthea itself, Ultima. Unlike so many villains driven by greed, vengeance, or the hunger for power, Ultima stands apart as something far greater and far more terrifying. He's not human, not even mortal, but a being from another world, one of the last survivors of an ancient civilization that sought to escape its dying home. To the people of Valisthea, Ultima is no villain at all, but a godlike presence woven into myths and forgotten scriptures. But behind this divine mask lies his true intent, the creation of a perfect vessel, a vessel capable of containing his overwhelming essence so that he might reshape the world in his own image, free of imperfection, free of weakness, and free of humanity. And this is where his brilliance as a villain truly shines. Ultima isn't just an enemy to Clive, he's the embodiment of the struggle at the very core of the story. He seeks control, order, and purity at the cost of individuality, freedom, and life itself. Every step Clive takes, every battle he fights, is ultimately against this destiny that Ultima has written for mankind. What makes Ultima stand out is not simply his godlike power, it's his philosophy. He views humanity as flawed tools, imperfect beings who exist only to serve his vision. To him, suffering and free will are meaningless. Yet that is the very human spirit, the bonds of love, the loyalty and sacrifice that become Clive's greatest weapon against him. And in the end, Ultima is not just a final boss, he's the shadow of fate itself, the embodiment of inevitability, of control of a world without choice. And it is only by defying him, by embracing the chaos and beauty of humanity, that Clive proves that even gods can be challenged and even destiny can be written. And that is why Ultima is on our first honourable mention list. Okay guys, our final honourable mention goes to Hugo Kefka from Final Fantasy XVI. Now, not every villain from Final Fantasy XVI comes from the heavens. Some are born from the earth itself, from power, greed, and the raw hunger of men, and few embody that more than Hugo Kefka, the dominant of Titan. Once a soldier of little consequence, Hugo rose through the ranks, not just through nobility, but through sheer ruthlessness and cunning. His pact with Titan gave him immense power, and it was that he used to climb higher than any commoner had ever dared before, becoming the economic backbone of the Dalmekian Republic. A man who once had nothing now had everything: wealth, influence, and the strength to bend nations to his will. But what truly defies Hugo isn't just ambition, it's loss. And when betrayal rips away the woman he loves, Benedicta, Hugo becomes consumed by a rage so absolute it blinds him to everything else. His vendetta against Clive and his allies turns him into a force of destruction, his titan form embodying his fury, a mountain of stone and wrath that cares for nothing but vengeance. And this is what makes Hugo stand out amongst Final Fantasy villains. He's not a god or a distant ideal. He's human, painfully, tragically human. His story is one of love twisted into obsession, ambition shattered into rage. Where Ultima represents destiny and control, Hugo represents what happens when raw human desire goes unchecked. He is a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not those who fall from the sky, but those who rise from the same soil as us. And though he may not shape the fate of Valisthea like Ultima or Barnabas, Hugo Kupka leaves his mark in a way only a man with nothing left to lose can, with fists of stone and a heart broken beyond repair. And that's why he's my second honourable mention. Kicking off our list of most iconic villains at number 10 is Golbez from Final Fantasy IV. Clad in dark armour and wielding unimaginable power, Golbez is one of Final Fantasy's most iconic early villains. To the people of Baron and beyond, he was a merciless warlord, commanding armies of monsters, seizing the elemental crystals and crushing anyone who dared to stand in his way. To Cecil, the hero of Final Fantasy IV, he was something even worse, the shadow that haunted his every step. But Golbez is not simply a man of evil ambition. His story is one of tragedy and manipulation. Born as Cecil's elder brother Theodore, he was separated from his family as an infant and ensnared by the will of a greater evil, the Lunarian sorcerer Zemus. Under Zemus's control, Golbez's heart was twisted, his mind clouded, and his power used as a pawn in a plan to bring ruin to the world. What makes Golbez so memorable is not only the destruction he causes, but the revelation of who he truly is. Behind the cold, imposing figure is a man torn apart by guilt, burdened with the crimes he committed while under another's influence. His bond with Cecil transforms from one of enmity to a reluctant kinship, showing that even those who fall to darkness can find a path back to light. In many ways, Golbez embodies the duality of Final Fantasy's greatest villains, the terror of a powerful enemy and the humanity of a broken man. He stands out not just because of his might or his presence, but because his story reminds us that villains are rarely born, they are made, shaped by forces beyond their control. At number 10 on our list, guys, Golbez earns his place as one of the franchise's first truly complex antagonists. A villain, a brother, and ultimately a tragic hero in his own right. That's why he makes number 10 on the list, guys. Okay, guys, at number 9, we have Exdeath from Final Fantasy V, a villain who doesn't just embody darkness, but was literally born from it. It just reminds me of Bane. Long before the events of Final Fantasy V, when the forces of evil threatened the world, the people sought to seal away their corruption in a massive ancient tree. The tree became a prison, holding hatred, malice, and the lingering essence of countless souls. But darkness has a way of festering. Over centuries, that corruption twisted, gained awareness, and eventually gave birth to a being of pure malevolence, Exdeath. Clad in shining blue armour, he presents himself like a knight or a sorcerer, but his heart is nothing more than the void. He isn't a man with ambition or grief, but an entity of destruction who seeks to return all existence to nothingness. His plan is horrifying in its simplicity. Break the seals, harness the power of the void, and erase not just the kingdoms, not just the people, but the very concept of life itself. And yet, what makes Exdeath iconic isn't just his cosmic threat, it's how he mocks the very things that define Final Fantasy heroes. He sneers at the bonds of friendships, scoffs at sacrifice, and ridicules the idea that hope can stand against the inevitability of darkness. To him, the fight for life is laughable, because everything is destined to return to nothing. And as the Warriors of Light battle him, Exdeath escalates again and again, consuming worlds, unleashing devastation on a scale rarely seen before in the series. And even when he's finally defeated, his essence doesn't simply die, it collapses into the very void he sought to unleash, transforming into the monstrous Neo-Exdeath, a nightmarish entity that embodies oblivion itself. Exdeath earns his place at number 9 because he represents Final Fantasy villainy in its purest form. Unlike tragic figures like Golbez or deeply layered foes like Sephiroth, he has no humanity, no redeeming qualities. He is the void made flesh, the inevitable pull toward nothingness, and sometimes the scariest villains aren't the ones you understand, but the ones you never can. And that's why Exdeath is worthy of a number 9 place on my list. Okay guys, at number 8 we have Seymour Guado from Final Fantasy X. Few villains in Final Fantasy are as unsettling as Seymour Guado, the half-human, half-Guado maester of Yevon. And at first glance, he kind of appears calm, elegant, even noble, a spiritual leader meant to guide Spira in its endless struggle against sin. But behind his soft words and regal composure lies one of the darkest, most tragic minds in the entire series. Seymour's story begins with rejection. Born of a Guado father and a human mother, he was shunned by both peoples, growing up an outcast, unwanted in either world. His mother's sacrifice, turning herself into a faith so that Seymour could survive, left him with both power and emptiness he could never fill. That loneliness twisted into bitterness, and bitterness into a philosophy that life itself is suffering, and the only way to end suffering is to end life. What makes Seymour so terrifying is that he truly believes he's a saviour. To him, death is not cruelty, but mercy, the final peace. His desire to become sin and destroy Spira was not born of simple malice, but of conviction that he alone could free the world from pain. And this is what makes him such a memorable villain. His ideology is horrifying, but it has its own twisted sense of logic. Seymour doesn't just haunt the story once, he returns again and again, each time more monstrous, his body and soul warping further with each defeat. His calm demeanour gives way to madness, and his obsession with Yuna to marry her, to bind her to his vision of salvation, only deepens the sense of unease he brings. By the time he takes on his monstrous form, Seymour isn't just an enemy to defeat, he's a spectre of death itself, clinging to his beliefs even as his humanity fades away. Seymour Guado stands out because he represents one of Final Fantasy's most frightening truths, that evil can wear a kind face, speak soft words, and believe wholeheartedly that it is doing good. At his core, Seymour is a tragedy, an unloved child who grew into a man convinced that oblivion was kindness. And that makes him one of the most unforgettable villains in the series, and my number 8.
So, it is you, after all, who will send me. But even after I am gone, Spira's sorrow will prevail.
At number 7, we have Kuja, the flamboyant, silver-haired sorcerer whose beauty and elegance mask one of the darkest souls in the series. From the moment he enters Final Fantasy IX, Kuja is captivating. He isn't just a villain who hides in the shadows, he takes center stage, he orchestrates wars, manipulates kingdoms, and bends others to his will with the grace of a performer, and the ruthlessness of a tyrant. But behind his theatrical arrogance lies a truth that makes Kuja one of the most fascinating villains in Final Fantasy. He is a genome, an artificial being created by the Terran overlord Garland, not to live a life of his own, but to serve as a temporary angel of death. His purpose was to sow chaos on Gaia until his eventual replacement could take over. And it is this revelation that he is designed, disposable, and doomed that drives Kuja's descent into madness. Unlike villains who seek power for conquest, Kuja's ambition is born of fear. Fear of death. Fear of being replaced. Fear that his existence has no meaning. In his desperation, he lashes out at the world, using war and destruction as a way to leave his mark. His elegance, his pride, and his cruelty are all armour, shielding a fragile, terrified being who cannot accept the inevitability of his own mortality. What makes Kuja unforgettable is the duality of his character. He's both a monster and a tragic figure. He engineers the fall of nations, he kills without remorse and revels in chaos. Yet at the same time, he's a deeply human in his flaws. But his fear of death is something that all players can understand, and it gives his actions a complexity rarely seen in villains of this era. And in the end, Kuja's story takes a turn that sets him apart from many others on this list: redemption. In his final moments, stripped of his arrogance and power, Kuja finds clarity. He chooses to save Zidane and his companions, sacrificing himself to give them a chance at life. An act that transforms him from a figure of hate into one of tragic poignancy. Kuja earns his place at number 7, not just as a manipulator, a destroyer, or a rival, but as a villain whose journey is as layered and complex as the heroes he opposes. He reminds us that even in the darkest of souls, there can be a glimmer of light. Coming in at number 6, we have Ultimecia from Final Fantasy VIII. She is the time sorceress whose very existence bends the boundaries of fate. Unlike many villains who dominate the story from the start, Ultimecia lurks in the shadows of Final Fantasy VIII. Her name whispered only in fragments, her presence felt in every struggle against the sorcerers who fall under her influence. Ultimecia's goal is chilling in its simplicity, time compression. By merging all of history into one eternal moment, she seeks to become the sole being in existence, a goddess reigning over a frozen universe where nothing and no one can challenge her. To her, individuality, freedom, and even the flow of time itself are obstacles to be destroyed. But what makes Ultimecia so iconic isn't just her power, it's her mystery. We know almost nothing of her origins, her past, or what makes her the way she is. And in that void, Final Fantasy VIII plants one of the most haunting ideas, that she could be the inevitable future of another sorceress, perhaps even Rinoa herself. Ultimecia is not just a villain. She's a possible destiny, a vision of what happens when power and loneliness consume a soul. Her influence spreads across time itself. She manipulates Eddie, corrupts Sephiroth into her knight, and wages war through pawns who never realise they are only pieces in her larger design. The battle against CD becomes more than a clash of armies. It's a war across generations, a cycle of sorceresses and resistance locked in endless repetition. And when the heroes finally confront her, Ultimecia becomes the embodiment of inevitability. Her final form is monstrous, transcendent, stretching across time and space as she declares herself eternal. She isn't just a foe to defeat. She's just time itself, turned hostile, a force that seeks to erase the very concept of tomorrow. Ultimecia earns her place at number 6 because she represents one of Final Fantasy's most unique visions of villainy. Where others are driven by human flaws, pride, fear, ambition, she is driven by something larger, the hunger to rewrite existence itself. Her mystery, her power, and her role as the ultimate shadow of destiny ensure her place as one of the most unforgettable villains in the whole series. Starting off our top 5, we have Caius Ballad from Final Fantasy XIII-2. A villain unlike any other in Final Fantasy, where so many seek power, immortality or control, Caius' story is born from something far more tragic: love, and the unbearable weight of eternity. Caius is the immortal guardian of Yule, a seeress doomed to die young, only to be reborn again and again throughout history. And for centuries, Caius watched her live and die in an endless cycle. Each life marked by suffering, each death a wound that never healed. While others might envy immortality, to Caius it became a curse, forcing him to endure loss countless times, powerless to change her fate. And so his heart hardened, his love for Yule twisted into despair, and that despair became his mission to break the cycle by ending time itself. By unleashing chaos and collapsing history, Caius would shatter the goddess's Etro's design and free Yule from her endless rebirths, even if it meant plunging the world into ruin. What makes Caius such an iconic villain is the depth of his conviction. He's not evil for the evil's sake, nor is he seeking to rule or destroy for his own gain. Every act of violence, every manipulation, every clash with Noel and Sira stems from the same place: his love for Yule, and his unwillingness to accept a world built on her suffering. And in his eyes, he's not a monster, but the only one strong enough to defy the cruelty of fate. Caius also lands apart in sheer presence. With his immense strength, mastery of chaos, and the heart of a dragon, literally bound to him through the heart of chaos, he's one of the most formidable foes the series has ever seen. His battles are legendary, his theme unforgettable, and his philosophy haunting. In the end, Caius Ballard is a villain who forces us to confront the grey areas of mortality. He is both a destroyer and a protector, a man whose love drove him to an unimaginable darkness. So at number 5, Caius earns his place as one of Final Fantasy's most complex and tragic villains, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats are born not from hatred, but from love. At number 4, we have Ardyn Zunia from Final Fantasy XV, the Chancellor of Nilfheim, a man who first appears to be a sly manipulator lurking in the shadows, but whose true story reveals him as one of the most tragic and unforgettable villains in Final Fantasy. Centuries before the events of Final Fantasy XV, Ardyn was not a schemer, not a villain, but a healer, chosen by gods to be king. He dedicated himself to saving his people, drawing the Star Scourge, the plague of darkness, into his own body to cure the sick. But his sacrifice came at a cost. Corrupted by the very darkness he sought to destroy, he was denied his rightful ascension, betrayed by his brother Somnus, and cast aside by the gods he had served. Immortal, tainted, and abandoned, Ardyn wandered through history as a forgotten soul, stripped of his purpose, consumed by bitterness. His fall was not into madness, but into vengeance. Vengeance against the gods, against the Lucian bloodline, and against the destiny that robbed him of everything he once was. What makes Ardyn so iconic is the duality of his character. On the surface, he's this witty, sort of charismatic, almost playful, like trickster who delights in mocking his enemies. But beneath that charm lies centuries of pain, and a cruelty sharpened by betrayal. His every move, every manipulation of Noctis and his companions is part of a grand plan to make the line of Lucas suffer as he once did. And yet, unlike many villains, Ardyn is not entirely wrong. He was a saviour turned outcast, punished for a sacrifice that should have made him a hero. His rage is absolutely understandable, his suffering undeniable, and that tragic foundation makes his role as Noctis' final adversary all the more powerful, because their clash is not just hero versus villain, but destiny versus defiance, light versus a man consumed by shadow. And in the end, Ardyn is unforgettable because he blurs the line between monster and martyr. He's cruel, vengeful, and manipulative, yet he's also sympathetic, a victim of fate and betrayal. So at number 4, Ardyn Izunia secures his place among Final Fantasy's greatest villains, not just for the destruction he brings, but for the haunting reminder that sometimes the darkest enemies are born in the brightest hopes. Okay, bronze medal. Number 3 goes to Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. The one-winged angel, and perhaps the most iconic villain in all of Final Fantasy, and a lot of people's number 1 pick probably, but not mine. His presence is so powerful, it's so unforgettable, and even those who've never played Final Fantasy VII know his name. Sephiroth's story begins not as a monster, but as a hero. He was Shinra's greatest soldier, a legend, admired by comrades and feared by enemies. The perfect warrior forged through the company's experiments. To Cloud and countless others, he was someone to look up to, a man who seemed untouchable and unstoppable. But everything changed when Sephiroth uncovered the truth of his origins. He was not a man chosen by fate, but an experiment, infused before birth with the cells of Genova, an alien being that once nearly destroyed the planet. The revelation shattered him, and in his despair, Sephiroth rejected humanity entirely, embracing the legacy of Genova and deciding that he was destined to become a god. His mission became terrifyingly clear: to merge with the life stream and claim the planet itself as his vessel. What makes Sephiroth unforgettable is not just his ambition, but the way he sort of intertwines with the heroes' lives. For Cloud, he's more than an enemy, he's a ghost from the past, a figure who shaped his very identity, and who continues to haunt his mind long after their first clash. For Aerith, he is the looming shadow that ends one of the most heartbreaking stories in gaming history. Few moments in the franchise are as infamous as Sephiroth's murder of Aerith, a single act that cemented him as one of the most hated and most iconic villains of all time. Sephiroth stands out because he is the perfect storm of power, tragedy, and presence. His theme, One Winged Angel, reminds one of the most legendary pieces of music in gaming. His silver hair, his black coat, his calm yet terrifying voice, every detail makes him larger than life. He isn't just a villain, he's a symbol. So at number 3, Sephiroth secures his place not only as a Final Fantasy villain, but as one of gaming's greatest antagonists of all time. A fallen hero, a broken man, and a god in the making, Sephiroth is the shadow that forever defines Final Fantasy VII, and the villain by which all others are measured. Coming in at number 2 is Emet-Selch. Some villains are terrifying because of their cruelty. Others are unforgettable because of their tragedy. Emet-Selch is both. Introduced in Final Fantasy XIV, he appears at first as a cunning Asian, a manipulator working in the shadows, pulling the strings of history, but the deeper his story unfolds, the clearer it becomes. Emet-Selch is far more than a simple antagonist. He is a survivor of a world long gone, carrying a grief so vast it reshaped his very soul. Long before the current age, Emet-Selch was Hades, one of the Convocation of 14, a being from the ancient starfaring civilization that once thrived before the Sundering. When a catastrophe threatened their world, the ancients turned to sacrifice, creating Zodiac to preserve life at a terrible cost. But when the world was sundered into the 14 shards, his people were scattered, their lives and memories erased, and Emet-Selch remained one of the few who remembered what had been lost. And so, for millennia, he carried a burden no one else could comprehend, the grief of losing his friends, his family, his entire civilization. His every scheme, every manipulation of mortals was part of a single desperate goal: to rejoin the sundered worlds and resurrect his fallen people, no matter how many lives it cost. What makes Emet-Selch so iconic is his humanity. Unlike villains who revel in destruction or chaos, his cruelty comes from love twisted by despair. He doesn't kill for pleasure, he sacrifices because he believes it is the only way to restore the world he lost. And he does it all while speaking with wit, charm, and a startling vulnerability that makes him feel painfully real. When the Warrior of Light finally confronts him in Shadowbringers, Emet-Selch doesn't beg for understanding, but he does ask to be remembered. His final plea, "Remember us," transforms him from a villain into something more, a tragic hero of his own story. One whose pain is undeniable, whose love for his people is eternal, and whose downfall is as heartbreaking as it is inevitable. Emet-Selch is not just one of the greatest Final Fantasy villains, he's one of the greatest characters in the franchise, period. A manipulator, a survivor, a grieving soul, and a reminder that the line between hero and villain is sometimes drawn only by perspective. Okay guys, our number one choice, of course, is Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. It was always going to be Kefka. I've got a bit of a soft spot for Kefka myself. So he's a villain whose name is sort of synonymous with madness, chaos, and pure and relenting evil. From the moment he appears in Final Fantasy VI, Kefka is impossible to ignore. His cackling laughter, flamboyant attire, and outrageous antics make him seem like an absolute joke at first, until his cruelty reveals its true, horrifying depth. Kefka begins as a bit of a court mage, a pawn in the Empire's schemes, but unlike most villains, he isn't driven by ambition or vengeance alone. He's driven by sheer nihilism, a belief that nothing matters, that life, love, and hope are meaningless. Experimenting with magitech on living beings, he murders without remorse, tortures for amusement, and manipulates the world around him simply because he can. And then comes his rise to godhood. After poisoning the Warrid Trier, Kefka ascends to unimaginable power, reshaping the world into a barren, nightmarish wasteland, the world of ruin. A reflection of his own chaotic mind. In his tower, floating above the ruined world, he's no longer a mere man, but a force of destruction itself. His laughter echoes across the shattered lands, a chilling reminder that he revels not just in power, but in despair. What makes Kefka so iconic is his unpredictability. He is the first true maniacal villain in the Final Fantasy series. Someone whose cruelty is not tempered by humanity or tragedy, whose ambition is total annihilation, and whose presence dominates the story. Yet, paradoxically, he's also unforgettable for his personality, his flamboyance, his sarcasm, his theatrical flair, and even his absurdity makes him a character who's terrifying and captivating at the same time. Kefka is a villain who embodies the purest form of chaos, a reminder that evil doesn't always need reason or motive, sometimes it just simply exists. And it is this combination of insanity, power, and sheer presence that earns him the top spot on my list. So at number 1, Kefka Palazzo isn't just a Final Fantasy villain. He is an icon of gaming history, a character whose madness will echo through the ages. So there you have it, guys. 10 of the most iconic villains in Final Fantasy history. From the godlike might of Ultima and the tragic obsession of Caius Balan, to the pure chaos of Kefka and the haunting grief of Emet-Selch. Each of these antagonists has left an unforgettable mark on the worlds they inhabit, and on us as players. What makes them truly unforgettable isn't just their power, their schemes, or their battles, it's their depth. The best Final Fantasy villains challenge the heroes, yes, but they also challenge us. They make us question morality, destiny, and the cost of ambition. They are tragic, terrifying, and sometimes even sympathetic. And through them, we see a great hero can only shine when opposed by an equally unforgettable foe. So whether you are drawn to Sephiroth's haunting presence, Ardyn's tragic vengeance, or Kefka's maniacal chaos, one thing is clear: Final Fantasy's villains are as complex, memorable, and essential as the heroes themselves. Which of these villains is your favourite, guys? Or is there a Final Fantasy antagonist you think deserves a spot on the list? Let me know. And don't forget, guys, hit the bell so you never miss another dive into the worlds of Final Fantasy. I've been your host Rayman from Respawn Games, and thank you for watching.